So let's look at the instructions and see how we can run the Docker file one by one. Okay, so as we saw, the first default instruction that we have is from, which will specify what is the image that you have to use to create a container out of which we are going to automate the process of creating a image. Then the next one is we saw run. So any command that you want to run inside the container, you will be giving it inside the option called run or the keyword called run. Okay, so that is what we are going to do. Then we have one more option called CMD, where CMD specifies what is that command that you want to run as soon as the container is launched. So when you are trying to run the container, which is being created based on this image, right? So what is that first thing that you want to run? It is not the first command that you are running here, but after creating the image from this, using this image, if you run certain container, in that container, what is the first command that you want to run? So that is what you're going to specify using CMD. So now, if I give in the Docker file instructions as CMD and some command, then it is not going to run in this container, but using this container, whatever the image that we have created, from this, if you create another container, in that, the very first command that you're going to run is CMD. Okay, so in fact, you can consider the CMD as the entry point for your container. So while using an image, if you're specifying a particular entry point or a command, then by default, what it will do is, if you have not specified anything, then it will be taking this particular command, whatever you have given. So that is how, if you have an image in which you want some application to be installed and automatically run, so that as soon as you create a new container based on an image, you can set up a CMD in such a way that as soon as you create a container, there will be a default command or a script that you can run, so that as soon as you get a container inside it, that particular script or command will be running. So that is how you can have an installation of an application inside and you can run it directly. So that every time we create a container, this particular command as the CMD will get executed as the first entry point command for the container. Okay. When you're passing the values, you always have to pass the CMD in the square brackets, and inside this, each option that you want to pass as a command will be separated by comma. Okay, so that is how you're going to pass it. So now let's see the same example here. Okay, for a minute, let me remove this. If I don't want to run this, I can simply specify a comment. Okay, so here what we will do is we will say CMD, and in the CMD we'll just simply give a command called hi, and we will give this message. So now what will happen when you're trying to create an image from this content, using that image, when you create a new container, while calling a new container, we know that we can pass a entry point in the beginning. So if you do not give it, then it will be taking this as the entry point or the first command inside that container, and it will be running. So let's try to use it. Let me open another screen. Okay, and let me go to the directory. So I'm in the same directory as where we have the Docker file. So in this, I'll say, let's create a new image. Okay, so we'll say Docker build -t my image June 02. Okay, and dot, so that it will be reading this configuration and it will be trying to create a image out of this. So now you can see, since there are only two commands that we have given, first what it has done is it has basically created a new container, and in this it just ran only the CMD, so there's nothing happened, and we have got a new image by the name my image zone. So if you say docker images, you can see you have got a new image. So now from this image, if I create a new container, in that the first command that it will be running is this. Okay, so watch this. So now if I create a new container based on this image, and if I do not give any command, that is the entry command after this, you can see it is basically running that as the first command when you're trying to call a container. Same thing, if I pass anything else, what will happen? It will overwrite with what you have given. So that is how you can see that if you do not give any entry point, that will be taken by default from the CMD. So whatever that you have given, it will be running it as it is. Whereas if you pass a entry command, then it will replace the CMD that you had given inside your Docker file, which is available in this image. Okay, so that's the use for CMD. So that whenever you want to create a container, and in that automatically if you want to run some script or command, then you will be using it. But remember, if you pass a entry point here, then this will overwrite whatever is the content that you have specified inside the image. Getting it? What is CMD? Next, there is another option called entry point. Now, this is exactly same as CMD, but the only difference is in the CMD, as we saw, if you pass any command, then that will be overwriting what you have given in the CMD. Suppose instead of overwriting, if you want to take this and add as one more option to the existing CMD, then you will not be using CMD. At that point of time, we will be using entry point. So what will happen in entry point is, if you have given entry point under command, then while Docker is running the image and it is created, if you do not pass, this will be the default one that it will be running. But if you additionally pass something from the command prompt on the entry point, then instead of overwriting it, it will append to it and then even take that value as a parameter to the option that you have given. So that is how, if you want to overwrite or replace the content, then you just say CMD. But if you want to append to the existing one, then we will say it as the entry point. So here, same thing. If I just change it to entry point, okay. And now from this, let's create a new image. So I'm going to create my image June 3 from this, okay. Oh, sorry. So we are going to build a new image called my image June 03 from this Docker file. So it is automatically creating. And now from this, let us try to use this and create a new container. Okay. So now watch what happens. If I say docker run -it and this image, and if I do not give any option, then by default it will be running this and it is printing me the output. The same thing now, if I give some option here, so if I pass a entry point here, then instead of replacing it with here, it is going to add it as one more value and execute this. You can see, so the command that I've given is echo, and for the echo, if you add one more option, pretty much it is going to echo both of them, right? So it is like this, echo Adam, and followed by this. Okay, so if you give both of them, then the output what you'll be getting is this. That is the same thing that we are getting it here. Okay, so getting the difference. So if you give it as an entry point, and if you pass an option as an entry point here, it will be adding as a value to what you have specified in the entry point. The same thing, if you want to overwrite the value with the existing value, then you will be giving it as CMD. So simply, CMD means it will take the default value, but if you specify it, it will overwrite. Whereas if you want to append to the existing value rather than overwriting, then you will be using entry point. Getting the difference between entry point and CMD? Okay, now moving on. Work DAR. So there is an instruction called as work DAR. So what is the purpose of this work DAR? Now, when you are writing the Docker file, what will happen? All the instructions that you will give will be in this, and the Docker will create a new container and it will try to run everything one by one. But while it is running, is there a specific directory inside which it has to do everything? So that is when, if you specify it using workdir, what Docker will do is, after creating the container, it will go to that specific directory, and under that it will be doing all the steps. Okay, so let's try to see that quickly. Where now, let's say instead of entry point, now I'll do one thing. I'll say run, and I'll create a file called test. Okay, so I'll say test Docker. Now see this, where it is getting created. Now this is my Docker file. So quickly let's create a image from this. Okay, I'll call it as 04. Okay, and then from this let's create a new container. So in this, if you look, it has created the file under root by default, because whenever you are going inside the container, by default it is available in the root directory. Hence it is trying to create this file in the directory where it is trying to run from the container. So by default it goes to the container under the root, and that is where it is trying to execute all the steps or commands one by one. So that case here, this file has got created under the root of this container. Now in some case, if you want to change some directory and then run this command, whatever you have given or the steps, then you can use the workdir. So what workdir instruction will do is, after going to the container, it will go to that specific folder what you have given, and in that it is going to run all the instructions that you have specified. Okay, so that is what we are going to do now. So pretty much now what I'll do is, above this, now what we will do, we will try to give the instruction as workdir and some directory. Okay, so if I say workdir/temp, then what will happen, while the container is created, it will go inside the temp folder and then run this command. So that is how, based on this image whatever we have, when we try to create a new container, under the temp folder of that container you can see a new file called test docker. Okay, so let's try to create one more image quickly. So I'll say image 5, and from this image 5, let's create a container. Okay, now if you go to the temp folder and then see, there will be a file available. That is because we have changed the working directory inside that container to this specific folder, and inside this, whatever commands that you're going to give following it will be executed. And not only that, if you have watched very carefully, the first directory now where we have gone inside while creating a container is based on this. So it is not only used for trying to specify where this command has to run inside the container, but also when you try to create a new container based on the image of this, then it is going to specifically switch the directory to that particular location what you have specified in the work dir. So that is how it will always go to that directory by default and run all the other options that we want. Okay, so work dir means you specify all the instructions that Jenkins has to run from which particular location. Okay, and based on that, all the other instructions that you give will be run from this particular directory under the work dir. Getting it? Vinay, Satish, Nagesh, Karnakar. Did you get it? What is the purpose of work dir? So if you want, we can still change the value during runtime. That is, now during the runtime, that is creating a container, if you give -w and give a path, then what will happen? So Docker will be changing the directory to this directory location, and from there onwards, it will be allowing you to work. Now here, the same thing, we were going under the temp because we have specified here, right? So if I try to create a new container, and for this container, if you give the option called -w, then let's say -w, and I'll give some other folder. So let's say user, okay, /user. Sorry, this is 5. Okay, so now if you can look, the default directory on which we are working is the /user. So that is how, if you have defined a work dir in the image, it will go to that location. If not, you can pass the same thing using the command line option when you're invoking Docker, and it will be actually going into this directory, and this is the directory from where it is going to basically what, run all the commands that you want to run. So either you can pass it through work dir or pass the -w option. Okay, so that is work dir. Now suppose when you're creating a new image, and out of that image, if a person creates a container, now if you want to set certain environment variable, then you can use an instruction called env, and you can specify what is the environment variable and what is the value of it that you can store, so that the new container that we are going to create will also have that particular environment variable. Now here I am inside a container. Here let me check if I have an environment variable called my name, for instance. As of now, there is nothing, right? So here in this particular Docker file, if I give the name called env as the instruction, and in this, let's say my name followed by the value that you want to give. Okay, so what will happen now is when you create a container, And from that, when it creates the image, it will try to store the name of the environmental variable as my name, and inside that it will be having a value called Adam. So that is how from this, if I create a new container, inside that if I go and do the same thing, I'll be getting back the value. So that is how using the keyword called env, we'll be setting up a environment variable in the image that we are going to create. So let me save. Let's come out of the container, and here let's first create a new image. So I'll say 6. So you can see it is trying to run all the commands one by one. So whatever the steps that we have given, it is going to run one by one. Okay. And in that, now if I create a new container from this, okay. So let's say docker run hyphen and the 6th name. Okay. So now if I say this, what is it going to do? Now under this, if you say my name, you can see the environment variable is set inside the container by default. So that is how you can try to set a environment variable using this keyword called env inside your Docker file. Getting it? On how do you specify a environment variable inside your image? Then followed by that, we have a keyword called user. So what is the purpose of user? Now, what exactly happens when you create a container? So here, if you see, I'm sorry, not this. Here. So I am inside this container, right? And in this, if you see, I'm working as root. So what happens exactly when you create a container is, it's not just going to create the container, but as which user that you are trying to run, it will be allowing the same user inside the container. Okay, so that means if you're trying to execute the Docker run as a particular user, then the container will be created and it will be allowing you to run inside using the same account as whom you have executed the Docker run. So if you have executed as root, then the container will get created as the root account, and inside that you will be working as the root only. Okay, so that is how, as whatever user that you are trying to run, it will be creating the container with the same person, and inside that it will be running it. Suppose you do not want to run everything inside the container as the same user, then you can use the option called as user. Okay, where if I try to say the user, all the instructions that it is going to run inside the specific container will be run as that particular account. And not only that, when you create a container from that image, the account that you have specified here using the user is what you will be seeing it internally as the user as whom you are running everything. Okay, so to cross check now, first thing what I'll do is, you can see we created a file called test docker, and what is the permission of that, or the owner? The owner is root. That is because we are running everything inside this container as root. That is why it is available as root. Now here, before this, I will say user, and I'm going to just give a dummy account called nobody. Okay, so now what happens in this is, when you try to execute this Docker file on the new container that it is going to create, what it will do? First, it will go to this particular directory inside this container, and in that it will be switching the user as nobody, and then it will run all these commands whatever you have given one by one. And from this, if you create a new image, out of this, if I create a new container once again, what will happen? Now, inside that, the default person as whom you will be going in is the user that you have specified. As well as if you go and check this file, we will be having the permission of this file as the nobody. Okay, so let's quickly try that. So first, let's build an image out of this changes. So I'll call it as image 7. And you can see it is running all the step one by one. And now from this image 7, we will create a new container. Okay. And you can see under the temp, the file that we have created is created as the user called nobody, because when we were running the instructions, it has used the account called nobody and it has run everything. So that is how you can specify what is the account that you want to use to run. And not only that, in this, if you look at the name of the user, it is nobody. Okay, so this is how you can specify it inside a Docker file, and whenever you create a container based on its image, you will be working as that particular user inside this. Suppose if I want to change this, let's say every time when I create a container out of this image, it is always going to allow me as nobody. Suppose if I want to change it to some other user, once again, here you can simply say -u and the name of the user as whom you want to connect or run everything inside it. So now you can see I am inside the container which is created based on this image, but here I have explicitly said to use the account called root. So that is how it is replacing with the default user that you have specified, and because of which you are trying to work everything or create everything as root. Okay, so this is how, if you want to be available inside an image in terms of the user ID, then you will say it using user. The same thing while creating a container manually, if you want to change the user, then you can say -u and the container will be created using this user account. Getting it? That is how you specify what user that we have to take up using the, during the runtime. Getting it? Okay. And going back to the concept of volume that we saw in the last class. What is a volume? Can anyone recall what is a volume? Yeah, a volume is nothing but a special directory through which you can share some contents between a container. Now, when we had to manually create a volume inside a container, then we were using the -v option, correct? The same thing now, if I want to first create a volume inside this container, and from this I have to create an image. So if I want to do, then that instruction that we have to give in the Docker file will be using a keyword called volume. So what this will do is, now while it is creating this temporary container, okay, so what is the Docker will do? It will try to create a new volume under this with the name of the folder that you are having. Then from this, it is going to create an image. So that is how now whenever we create a new container based on this image, it will be having this volume by default inside that also. So that is how you can make sure that a particular volume is going to pre-exist inside a image, and from that if you create a container, it will be available. Okay, it's the same thing as we were invoking it through the command line using -v. So instead we can specify it as a volume in this. Okay, so now let's try to change it here. So if I say volume, and let's give some data or the directory inside which you want to act it as a special directory called volume, so that you can specify it using the square brackets. Okay, so now let's say I'm going to create a folder called data, and that will be used as a volume inside that image. So from that image, whatever containers that we are going to create, that will be having the particular volume by default as slash data, just to make sure we do not have a data in all the other containers, right? So let's exit. The first thing we will do is we will try to build this into a new image. Okay, so now what I'm going to do, out of this changes, I'm going to build a new image. Okay, so we will build a new image where it is going to run all the steps one by one. Okay, and out of this, if you run the Docker images, you can see we have created a new image called my image June 08. Correct? Now, from this, if I create a container, that container will have certain volume called a slash data, that if I want, I can share it to another container. So let's try that. So we will use this and create a new container. Okay. Now what I'm doing, I'm trying to use this image, and in this image I'm going to go inside as a root, and then we will be trying to create a new container. Okay, so under this, if you now go to data, there is a folder available because this is a volume that we have created from this image. So let me put some file here. Okay, and let us keep this as it is. Now from this, what we will do, probably I'll create one more. Okay, now what we will do is we will try to create a new container, and for that container we will try to specify this location, or we will say use the volumes from this. Okay, so now I'll simply say docker run -it. Let's say I will use the base Ubuntu image, and for this, now if I have to use the slash data from this particular container, then what is that we have to do? We'll say privilege this one, privileged equal to true, and then volumes from the name of the container. Correct? So privileged equal to true, and is the spelling correct? Leged. Okay, privileged equal to true, and then we will say volumes from, and for this we are going to specify the value that the container that we have created some time back. Okay, so this I will specify the container here. So now out of this, it has created a new container. So if you go, you can see that the data folder is also available, and in that you also have this particular file. And if you delete it directly, it is also going to be get deleted inside that. So that is how you can create a volume using the Docker file, using the special keyword called volume. Getting it? Any questions? Is that clear so far? Okay. Now we have certain more options that we will see. So the first thing is copy instruction. Now here, when we are creating a temporary container for creating an image, whatever instructions you want, we will be giving in the Docker file. But let's say if I want to create a volume inside it, I am going to create a instruction called volume, and that will be creating inside it. But what if I want to share something from the host machine to the container, so that using this it has to package or it has to create this image? So what I'm trying to say is, while creating this container, I want to put some files which is available in our host machine, so that from this container, when it creates the image, that file will be available in the image. So for that, first we have to put that file inside the container, right? So how is that you're going to do? Because we are not doing any connection between this container, because if you are connecting, then we can copy. So for that kind of instructions, we will be using a keyword or a special instruction called copy, where if you give a specific file name which is available on your host machine, that will get copied to the specific folder inside your container, so that inside this container, whatever the file that you are specifying, it will get copied. So to copy the file from your host machine to this temporary container which the Docker is using for creating the image is what we call it as copy. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is, let's come out of this, and okay, here to this particular one. So let's say what we will do now is, here I'll say copy, and from the current directory we will try to copy a dummy file. Okay, and that we will try to put it under the data folder, and if you want, you can give a name also for what you want to put it as. Okay, so what I'm doing now is, when you execute this Docker file, in the current directory, if there is a file called dummy file, it will try to take that and it will try to put inside this folder or the volume what you have created. Okay, so that is what we are going to do. So let's save this. Okay, all right. Now we have only the Docker file in this current directory, correct? So here I will create the same file. Okay, so I have two files in it, and from this location, if I do docker build -t, and let's give the name. Now what it is going to do, while it is creating the temporary container, it will try to create a volume, and inside this, from our host machine, this file will get copied inside this particular folder inside this container, so that from this temporary container, if you create a new image, that will also be available. So that is how, if a person is going to create a container from this image, he will be getting the file which you have copied inside it from our host. Okay, so you can see it is copying everything. Okay, it has just copied. Now from this, if I create a new container, so I'm using the newly created image and I'm trying to create a new container out of it. So now if you go to the data folder, it will be available because we have created it, and in that you can see you have the same file available. Whereas remember, it is not sharing, but it has just copied, because now if I try to edit this file, for example here, let me edit this. Okay, if I change some content into it. Let's say test line, and I'll put inside this file. Okay. And if you come out of this and see in the host, it will not be modifying it. Okay. So I'm back to my host. You can see there is nothing because it has not been sharing, but what we are doing using the copy instruction is we are copying our file or a file from our host machine to the particular container so that this file will be put inside our image, and from that if a person is creating a container, we will be getting that file inside his container automatically. Getting it? What do you mean by copy? Okay. The same way, now what if we have more than one files to copy? Now, if it is one file, then simply I can give copy command. Suppose if I have more than one files, then I cannot keep writing the Docker file for each file. I cannot say copy this file, copy this file. I cannot give 10 or 15 lines based on how many files we have. So in that case, we can make use of another instruction called add, where what is that add going to do? Now it is exactly similar as copy, but the difference is now if you have a file which is specifically of a archive means a tar file or a zip file, then instead of copying it like how the copy instruction does, what add will do is add will extract the content what you have inside your container. Okay, so if you keep a particular star file on your host machine, and if you say add, it will direct and it will go inside the temporary container and it will extract everything to a specified directory. Okay, so that is what it is going to do rather than copying. So this is how, if you have more than one file, then simply you can try to put everything as a archive, as a simple zip file or as a tar file. Then if you say add, what it will do, while creating the temporary container, it will extract the content of this archive into the specific folder what you have given. Okay, now let's do that simply. Here we have two files, right? So we will create a tar file out of these two files. So I'll say create a tar file where I will say add.tar and both the files. Okay, you can see now we have created a file called add.tar, and inside this it is going to contain these two files. You can see inside this tar we have two files. Okay, so now instead of copying it one by one, we can use the instruction here. So if I say add and the name of the file and where you want to extract it. So now it will not copy this but extract the content of this inside this folder called data on the temporary container, and the same thing will be taken forwarded as creating a image. Okay, so I've just added it. So from this, let's create a new image. Okay, so it would have extracted, and from this let us create a new container. This is the image that we created now. So here if you go to data, you can see it has directly extracted these two files which is available inside this archive or the tar file. So that is how, if you have more than one files to copy, simply create an archive and put it using add, where rather than copying, it will directly extract it to the specified folder. Getting it? Any questions? Okay. Now, when you're actually writing a Docker file, we will be giving an instruction called maintainer. Actually, it is not used for executing anything, but just to know who is the person who is going to take care of this Docker file and maintaining it. Okay, so it is just like a comment. Docker will not execute anything what you have given. So when you are trying to write a Docker file, it's like a header message, or it is the information to know who is been maintaining it and who is writing. So you can give this instruction called maintainer, and to this, if you give the username and the email id, it will be storing it, so that at any point of time, if you want to know who is the person who created it, it is like a comment where we can specify the username and the email id of the person who has been creating and modifying this particular Docker file. So only for that purpose you will be telling the maintainer instruction, which will tell who exactly is writing or maintaining this Docker file. Okay, so it's just a way for maintaining it. And then coming to the other one, expose. So if you recall, yesterday we were seeing if we have some web application inside our particular Docker container, and if you want to expose that to the particular host machine, then you will be using -p. The same thing is what you're going to do here. So now let's say if you are using this container, temporary container, to actually install some application, rather than just installing a VIM, let's say you are using it to install a application. Then when you create an image, from this image, this application will be running inside it, correct? So that now from this image, if we create a new container, this application will also be running in the new container. Now, if I want to access whatever is available inside it, then I should have exposed the port specifically in that new container. So that is what you're going to do it here using the instruction called expose. So what it will happen is when you say expose and the port number, while creating the temporary container, it will expose the port whatever that you're specifying here on this particular container, so that the same thing will be getting created as an image. And from this image, if we create a new container, what will happen? In that container, the application will also be running, as well as the port 8080, whatever that you have in that, will also get exposed. So that is how you can think about using a Docker image where you can install certain application and you can run it, as well as if you create a new image, and from that if a person creates his container, he will be getting the application running inside it, as well as he will be able to access that application outside the container, so that you will be exposing the port number specific to that application what you're trying to install. Getting it? What do you mean by expose? It is the same thing how we manually created a container, we will pass the option -p. The same thing, if you are going to use the Docker file for this temporary container, then we will be giving it through this instruction called expose, so that when it is creating this container, in this it will be exposing a port called 8080 or whatever that you have specified. Now anything that is available in the container will be exactly taken and created as an image. And from this image, if we create any new container, we will be getting the exact content what you have in the image on that container. So that particular application, as well as whatever the port which you have exposed, will also be the same thing on the new container. Getting it? Getting what is expose? Okay. Now, with this, yes, wherever you are running, it is the same port. That is what you are giving it. Because if it is exposing something else, and what is the purpose? Whatever the port number you give, that is the same port number which it will be exposing it on the host also. Now, with this example, whatever that we have, I mean, the different kind of instructions,